Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Sean with Link Senior. I appreciate you all joining us for our presentation today. We're going to get started in just about 4 minutes at 1 o'clock Eastern. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to chat those into the chat box or ask via the question box. Otherwise, we will be getting started in 4 minutes. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to others. I appreciate you joining us today for Link Senior's hosting of Cognitive Health and Resident Engagement webinar with your presenters, Dr. Robert Winningham and Charles DeVillemorin. Before we dive in, do want to cover just a few housekeeping details. As you'll notice, everybody is on mute. This is so that we can keep out any type of background noise and make sure that we stay on time. Today's webinar will be 1 hour long, and if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put those into the question box. I'm happy to answer throughout, or we will address those at the end. Also, if you would like a copy of today's PowerPoint, you can access that in the handout section. Lastly, of course, as today's webinar has continuing credits, or continuing education hours associated to it. At the end of the presentation, I will put a survey into the chat box, a link to take the survey. You will also receive that survey in your follow-up email. Everybody who would like to receive credit for today's attendance must take that survey. So whether you're the only one watching it on your screen or you have a team with you, each person must fill out that survey. That's how we'll be able to send out the CEU certification or credits. And again, that will be presented at the end of the presentation. So we're going to go ahead and dive in here. Today's objectives, we're going to quickly touch on, I'll give you a quick introduction into who Charles and Dr. Rob are. And then we're going to turn it over to the hosts to discuss the latest research linking engagement to care, occupancy, and satisfaction. We'll also touch on some best practices and technological advances. And as I mentioned, we'll open up time at the end for open Q&A, but please feel free to plug those in throughout. So our two presenters today, the first is Dr. Robert Winningham, who is a professor of psychology and gerontology and also has a PhD in neuroscience. He's published a number of books and scientific articles in the area, such as The Aging Brain, Memory and Aging, and Enhancing Older Adult Qualities of Life, and has been participant in over 1,000 presentations. So, you know, great feedback and great knowledge going into this. Our other presenter is Charles de Vilmorin, who is the founder and CEO of Link Senior, a cloud-based therapeutic resident engagement platform. With over 9 years of healthcare and long-term care experience, Charles actually got into the industry by writing his master's thesis on the nursing home and the area around there. So at this point, what I will do is I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rob, and we're going to allow him to dive into the presentation. Dr. Rob, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And thank you for everybody who showed up today. We have a jam-packed hour with a lot of great information, useful interventions that you can put into practice immediately, and just a really good update on research from the past 10 years as to how we can maximize older adults' quality of life. And there's a call to action today. If I was to kind of summarize you know, some of the research and how I want to present it today, I would say that wellness programming is absolutely essential to create the best communities we can. And I think you're going to see in the next 45 minutes or so that we really need to invest in fitness programming, a focus on brain health, and just try to create environments where people can live both meaningful and purposeful lives. It's not all about activities, and we'll talk about activities today, but really our goal is meaning and purpose. I would also say that a lot of these interventions can help improve the community, and I want to look a little bit at that. I think that there's a return on investment from a marketing standpoint, from just creating a vibrant community that people want to come live in, but we also can improve the quality of life of all of our residents. And we have some slight differences in the research in terms of the level of care, the level of cognitive impairment. I'll try to flesh those out a little bit, but the take-home message is, regardless of level of care, be it even living in one's home, independent living in the senior living environment, assisted living, skilled, memory care, the research shows that life enrichment can still improve quality of life. So we'll be looking at that. All right, so I'm going to start really big picture. If I was to summarize the past 10 years of research on what we can do to maximize cognitive abilities and decrease the chance of dementia, this is what the research tells us. Number one, cognitive exercise. And this study right here from the journal Neurology, they predicted that about 15% of how much our memory ability changes in older adulthood is related to our level of cognitive stimulation. So maybe 15% doesn't sound like a huge amount, but given that 50% is genetic, 15% is accounting for a lot of the non-genetic factors. And if I was to run through the other factors that we have seen on the scientific literature that have an effect on cognitive ability, I would throw out physical exercise. And we're going to bore down into that one a little bit. The National Institutes of Health recently said physical exercise is the factor we are most confident can delay symptoms of dementia. And we've really learned a lot about that, and I think it's ready for prime time. What we have learned is ready to be implemented as a best practice in our community. So I really want to talk about that. Kind of at the 30,000 foot view, I'd also add we clearly need to reduce depression. That will impair every single type of memory ability that we can measure. So that's important. There's also research that shows improving social engagement, particularly for middle-aged adults, younger, older adults, is highly correlated with your chance of developing dementia. And some of the best research there comes out from Harvard University and Lisa Berkman's lab, who she has shown a fairly robust effect on social engagement. If we do all of that, we reduce diabetes, we maximize sleep, particularly for those older adults, geriatric population, in a skilled environment, in a rehab environment, in an environment where they might have a roommate while they're recovering. Research has shown that can be quite disruptive to sleep, particularly if somebody is incontinent. There's even a study that shows having an incontinent roommate in a dual room setting reduces sleep. Other research shows 1 night of poor sleep for an older adult reduces memory ability by about 12%. So just right away, we're decreasing quality of life. And in that environment, we might be decreasing the ability to rehabilitate the individual. Nutrition also matters. So we put this all together and we counted for nearly all of the other 50% that's not genetic. And that's what I really think we need to be mindful of moving forward so we can implement these sorts of interventions. The physical exercise, like I said, we really understand that. An 18-study meta-analysis was done on that, and they found that the older you are, the more physical exercise helps. They also found, and we've really learned a lot more about this in the past few years, aerobic training and strength training, sometimes called resistance training, is better than either alone. And so we'll be talking about that. The resistance training seems to release a different brain-derived neurotrophic factor that independently increases cognitive ability above and beyond what we get from aerobic exercise. So that's really exciting. Now, I have to kind of share an idea here, and I was noticing that a lot of the research comes down to a phrase, executive functioning. Now, executive functioning is what physical exercise, either aerobic training or strength training, always seems to improve. And if you look at the past 10, maybe 12 years of research, when we've kind of started figuring this out, that's what all of the studies find. That's what the researchers look for, executive functioning, and we find physical exercise improves that. And this is important because executive functioning includes attention, also the ability to inhibit. And there's different types of inhibition. You can have cognitive inhibition, and that's controlling one's distractibility. It also can be controlling one's emotionality. And we see when people develop greater cognitive impairment, a lot of times they have a hard time putting a brakes on an anxious thought or a sad thought, and we call that emotional perseveration. And sometimes that can become extreme, and I think many of you have probably seen people, I've heard therapists call this a mind racing, and they can't turn it off. Maybe they're really angry. They might even strike or hit somebody. And in many settings, it's not uncommon, unfortunately, for those individuals to receive a chemical restraint to control that behavior. And we don't necessarily have to do that if we do a good job on this life enrichment. So there's both cognitive inhibition and also behavioral, controlling one's body so we don't hit people, you don't spit, you don't scream. Executive functioning also includes problem solving, reasoning, planning, and working memory. That's how much information you can hold on your mind at any moment. And that actually is a very good predictor of your ability to make new memories and your ability to comprehend and understand what's going on around you. So that's what we're going to find. We're going to find executive functioning is related to a lot of these interventions. And that just kind of summarizes the past 5 years of research. So we're going to see that. And this executive functioning stuff is important. There are literally hundreds of studies go into this one slide. We know executive functioning is correlated with depression. When executive functioning is worse, depression rates increase. We also see people who have executive functioning deficits, often associated with frontal lobe impairment. They have a hard time getting better if they have depression. So these people that emotionally perseverate, they can't turn off that anxious thought or that sad thought. They're less likely to get better if they are depressed. Executive functioning is also correlated with anxiety. And very importantly, it's correlated with our ability to engage in not only activities of daily living, but also instrumental activities of daily living. So executive functioning predicts our level of independence. And as an aside, it also predicts your driving ability, and it's a very good predictor of your chance of falling. Second, possibly to lower extremity strength. That might be the strongest factor that predicts falling, but also executive functioning and attention predicts it as well. So you see the benefits of improving this. So how do we improve executive functioning? How do we maintain it? Well, in a review of the published literature that just came out in 2016, they looked at the effects of physical exercise on cognition and concluded that physical exercise not only improves executive functioning, it improves global cognitive abilities. And if you've improved executive functioning, you've also probably improved memory and processing speed. So this is a very good way to improve quality of life. Like I said, we need to look at a mixture of aerobic and strength training. I visit a lot of communities. I've visited hundreds or thousands of communities with older adults, and I find there's a lot of variability, that's for sure. But I find if there's one thing that's easy to do that's missing, it's the focus on the resistance training. Most communities I visit will have some sort of aerobic training program, but they probably could do better on the resistance training. And maybe in different modalities, there's different ways to deliver those types of programs. And once again, this resistance training is hugely important. So Teresa Lou Ambrose, she's one of the main researchers looking at the effects of resistance training on cognition. She did a 12-month intervention and had older adults either do a once-a-week resistance training, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 5-pound weights, 10-pound weights. You could even use TheraBand or resistance bands. They had 11% improvement in executive functioning. 20 minutes, once a week for a year. Now, the twice-a-week group had a 13% improvement. So obviously 13 is better than 11, but you get a lot of those benefits from once a week for 20 minutes. That's a huge effect. It's actually the same lab, just a different first author. They wanted to see how the resistance training would work for people that have mild cognitive impairment, maybe even potentially diagnosable as early stage dementia. So people that are beginning to have some deficits. And I'll tell you, people with mild cognitive impairment, it's a recognized diagnostic disorder. And nearly 20% of people that have mild cognitive impairment right now are going to have diagnosable dementia in the next year. 80% of them are predicted to get it within the next 5 to 6 years. So time is of the essence. But twice a week, 20 minutes resistance training changes that curve. And in 1 year, it led to a significant improvement in executive functioning. That's exciting. And we've already talked about all of the things that can affect. You improve executive functioning, you've just improved global cognitive ability as well. So obviously the light weights can do this. You can do body supported exercises. A commonly used test of strength is just how many times can you go from seated to standing in 30 seconds or 1 minute. That's actually a body weight supported exercise. Things like that can be done. There's all sorts of chair exercise types of programs, sit to be fit, for example, but also the resistance training. So very inexpensively, we can get people hooked up with a resistance training program they can do in their home, they can do in an activity room, they can do with others. So this doesn't require a lot of money. We just have to have a focus on this, tell people the benefits, give them the tools, and show them how to do it. And physical exercise at all levels of care, not only the independent and assisted living, but also the memory care residents, so they can all benefit. And I have some more information about that. But I want to insert some other ideas here real quick. In the past 5 to 10 years, there have been nearly 100 studies on 3 ways to improve executive functioning. And this is potentially something that you all could implement in your settings. So first of all, I want to talk about yoga. So over 20 studies were recently combined in a meta-analysis, and they found that yoga improved executive functioning. They think it could be because of the resistance training. So you will get some resistance training if the yoga is done right, but also a little bit of aerobic training and a little bit of mindfulness. If you're focusing on your breath while you're doing the exercise, that could also be helping executive functioning. So yoga improves executive functioning. As many or more studies have found Tai Chi also improves executive functioning. And finally, meditation. Meditation, in my opinion, has a place in our life enrichment programming across the levels of care. We can even do some mindfulness training in memory care residents. It might just be focusing on one's breath for 5 breaths and just counting those out, for example. So these are some different interventions that can also help. Now, you might say, I don't know how to do meditation. Well, there's an app for that. There's a lot of programs for that. So even for a small amount of money, you can get access to high quality meditation programming. So this was an exciting study I wanted to make sure you all knew about, particularly those of you that work in memory care settings. So a study published in the Journal of American Medical Association reported the results of going into memory care residents' rooms a couple of times a week and saying, hey, would you like to exercise? I'm a certified fitness trainer and I'd be happy to exercise with you. Would you be willing to do that? Well, of course, not everybody does it every time, but for those people that were given those options 2 to 3 times a week, saved $12,000 per year on average. That even includes the people that didn't participate when they were in memory care. We think this might be because they were more independent. They were better able to do their activities of daily living. They're more mobile as measured by a higher score on the FEM motor test. So they're better able to get to the bathroom. They're less likely to fall, for example. And they might have also been less likely to experience other comorbidities that would increase the cost of care and reduce quality of life. So all the way from independent living older adults to memory care residents, physical exercise has a place in improving quality of life. And it just seems to me, it almost goes without saying, we need to invest in fitness, the fitness centers, the fitness staff. I've been disappointed in some communities that we don't have enough focus and training for some of these frontline staff, some of the life enrichment directors to offer high quality fitness programming. And given the benefits, I really think we need to invest in that. The residents need to have access to those fitness trainers who can develop and sustain these programs. There's also the benefits of cognitive exercise. And many staff will do the physical exercise and the cognitive, and that's great. And by the way, I think we might have a study in here showing we can mix those. And that's called dual tasking, where you do physical and cognitive at the same time. And that has been shown to improve executive functioning as well. Some very robust effects there, mixing cognitive exercise with the physical exercise. So that's something to consider. But we know the cognitive interventions alone can have a significant improvement. We've seen this in the research that we've done in our labs. We found that, this is a study that we did, we found that in just 3 months of exercising the brain up to 3 days a week for an hour, there was a 15% improvement in cognitive ability. So that's the time 1 to time 2 on the blue there. And we used the Rivermead Behavioral Memory Test, which measures your ability to remember names, faces, stories, routes, appointments you need to keep, where you put something. I mean, the things we all need to do to stay independent. And we were able to improve that by about 15% in 3 months in an assisted living environment. So that's what's possible. So it's not just one thing. It's not just physical exercise. It's not just cognitive exercise. We need many factors here to fully realize the potential of our residents. We published that paper in the Journal of Mental Health and Aging. In the final paragraph of that paper, we wrote, if older adults can maintain their cognitive ability, it's going to require less care, possibly delay, or even eliminate the need for skilled nursing. These cognitively stimulating activities may postpone the symptoms of dementia. And those words were chosen very carefully. Postpone the symptoms of dementia. You know, doing something like Sudoku is not going to prevent amyloid buildup in the brain. Doing Sudoku is not going to prevent Lewy bodies, tau proteins, neurofibrillary tangles, neuritic plaques, you know, the hallmark neuropathophysiology of different types of dementia. But what it does is it improves executive functioning, and it can allow people to live normally while the symptoms are delayed. So it's a different perspective. We still don't have a drug to cure dementia, right? Now, maybe we can give Aricept or something like that to treat some of the symptoms for a period of time, but we don't have a drug that can effectively clear that neuropathophysiology and lead to an improvement in cognition. Now, we just so you know, we did develop a drug that can clear amyloid protein, but it hasn't worked. Even though we clear the amyloid protein in the brain, it doesn't improve cognition. So this is what we're left with. We're left with maximizing executive functioning and postponing the symptoms of dementia. And it's doing things like Sudoku, you know, so we need to have numbers 1 through 9 in every horizontal row, every vertical column, and every subsquare. This exercise is executive functioning. So if you look at the top center subsquare there, you see it has 6, 7, 8, 9 in it. So it's missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what goes right below the number 7? Second row, 6th column. You know what it is? It's a 5. Has to be a 5 because we already have a 5 in the top row and we have a 5 in the third row. So no more 5s are needed there, but we need a 5 somewhere in the middle row. It has to go there. Now, if you look at the very center subsquare, it's missing 1, 5, and 9. Does 5 go into cell A, cell B in the very center, or cell C? Yeah, it goes right there in cell A. We know it has to because it can't go in the column where we first put the 5, and it can't go in the very center column because we have a 5 down here in the second to bottom row, so it has to go here. Now we're just missing numbers 1 and 9. Does 1 go into cell A or cell B? That's right. It goes right there in cell A. It has to because we already have a 1 here. So this is actually exercising executive functioning. You have to pay attention, don't be distracted, come up with a plan, hold that information in working memory, and figure it out. It's things like this that the research has shown, that's executive functioning activities, the research has shown leads to, and this is very important, leads to an improvement in abilities that have never been trained. For example, if we have a lot of activities that exercise executive functioning and we can improve it, that improvement generalizes or transfers to things that were never trained, such as remembering that you took your medication this morning. Now, we've never trained them on that, but if they have improvements in attention, concentration, their ability to make new memories, that's going to improve. That's going to lead to increased level of independence and quality of life. So that's what this is all about. We have some simple Sudokus, some 4x4s, 6x6s, and then and I have a lot of these on my website at robwinningham.com. Just go down and click on the article. Crossword puzzles are not as good as Sudoku puzzles. That's right. Crossword puzzles don't really exercise executive functioning. They exercise your ability to retrieve previously made memories. It's a very different ability. There's actually no evidence that crossword puzzles help, by the way. I even linked an article that also found that in that the end of that webpage. But at the bottom of that article, I have many Sudokus. So you can get your clients and residents started with some easy 4x4. Then I have some hard 4x4, and then some 6x6. And I also have thousands of 9x9 Sudokus that you can link to and print out. Or you can go to a dollar store and get a whole book of Sudokus, cheap. They cost like, well, $1 actually. So you'll be off and running. There are other platforms, and this has really changed. I've made literally hundreds of paper and pencil tests to do these studies and support the senior living industry. But wow, there's a lot. So we have them in Link Senior. So I would have the good fortune of working with Link Senior. We made some cognitive stimulation activities. We also have them available on the iPads and other tablets, things like FitBrains. I recently had a subscription to Brain HQ. And so these were dynamic programs. So if you get a question right, the next one's harder. If you get a question wrong, the next one's easier. And then we have some other ones that exercise specific abilities, things like Sudoku, Tetris, Brain Lab. Memory Block is a fun one. That's the old game Simon that some of you of a certain age might remember. And there are others there. So many different ways to get this cognitive stimulation. And the computer-based cognitive stimulation is what the researchers are using for the most part these days. We can standardize it across participants. We can measure how much they've done, some other things. This is kind of a best practice in the research now. And one of the studies published in prestigious journal PLOS One described the results of an 8-week, 3 days a week for 8-week, 24-session intervention using computer training group relative to a waitlist control group. People that were willing to participate, we said, okay, just wait a couple of months and then you can join the study. We measured changes over time. They found with the computer training significant improvements in immediate memory. That's similar to working memory, what you can hold in your mind at any given moment. Attention, which is a major part of executive functioning, and visual spatial memory, which particularly vulnerable in some of our most common types of dementias, such as Alzheimer's. So that's 8 weeks, you can get those sorts of effects. So we have empirical evidence supports all of these things: cognitive stimulation, aerobic training, resistance training, social engagement programs, nutritional efforts, mindfulness training, and don't forget the yoga and Tai Chi as well. So this is what the science tells us is possible, and this will help us with the non-genetic factors and our risk factors for dementia. The benefits of high-quality life engagement programs are obvious. The benefits help the resident and maximize their quality of life. But I'm going to argue, and there's good evidence to support that these programs, while they require a significant investment on the part of the communities, they have a potential for a significant return on that investment, not only for the resident, but also for the community and the company. Here's the thing. Active communities attract active members. So if we're looking at independent living, assisted living, and this is adult children are a big part of this decision-making process in many families. So they visit the community with their loved one and they see, wow, there's people here that are very active. We have an active physical exercise program, an active social program. We have cognitive stimulation. We might have some Link Senior products here, kiosk and tablets that people are engaged in. They see that, say, that's where I want to live. That's where I want my mom or dad to live. Prospective residents need to see a place where they would want to live. I think this is also important in the aging in place communities. I work a lot with continuing care retirement communities. This is very important. We want a community that's going to attract people, maybe even in their 60s or early 70s. You're not going to get the people in their 60s and early 70s if you don't have a good life enrichment program. I'm on the board of directors on a large CCRC, and we just did a survey, and we found that the top 10 things that prospective residents want all relate to life enrichment. They want physical exercise programs. They want cultural events. They want lifelong learning. We need to offer that in order to attract active members. And attractive residents who are not yet high need. And what's happened since the recession, a lot of you experienced this, assisted living in particular is much higher need on average throughout the country because people couldn't sell their homes. They waited longer. Home health care went in. We also had people staying longer in assisted living as a result. Home health care went into assisted living. And And we've had a kind of a shift in the level of care needed at independent assisted living and even memory care. So we really need to attract the residents before they are high need. And I'd argue that success begets success on that. The more you do that, the more it's going to attract an active, healthier population. We also have reduced turnover amongst our residents when they need to move on to higher levels of care. We saw that in the JAMA study. Memory care residents need less care if they have physical exercise. That would also be true for assisted living and independent. If we can keep them healthier, then we can delay the need to move on to a higher level of care. Sometimes you'll have to leave your community to go to a higher level of care. Those vacancies cost communities money. Those vacancies require marketing. And if it's a competitive environment, there's some competing communities around, that can be quite expensive when somebody moves out. And this all relates to my colleague, Dr. Roger Landley. He wrote the book, Live Long, Die Short, CEO of Masterpiece Living. This is exactly what his book is about. We want people to successfully age. And if you successfully age, you're going to be at a higher level of functioning. You always can have those little dips, but you're going to come back up. And then the title of his book comes from this idea that we want to live long, have successful aging for a long time, and die short. Rather than a slow decline into decrepitude over many years of reduced quality of life, we want to maximize that quality of life as long as possible. It almost goes without saying. But what we're talking about here promotes this curve. What's needed for successful aging, according to Dr. Landry? Exactly the things we've been talking about. Physically active, mentally active lifestyles, social engagement, purpose and meaning. And the environment needs to support that. That's what we're talking about here, right? There's also benefits for the skilled nursing and the rehab hospital. So obviously these are very different environments than, an independent living. But rehospitalization penalties are quite significant. It's nearly $250,000 a year is the average rehospitalization penalty. And a lot of the reasons for rehospitalization are related indirectly to executive functioning, either through falls or inability to care for oneself, inability to comprehend instructions, things such as that. Now, one of the highest reasons for one of the main causes, according to some recent studies, are infections and sepsis. So I don't know if the life enrichment is going to help that much, but some greater awareness of some of those issues it might. But some of the tertiary reasons for rehospitalization are certainly affected by what we're talking about here. And so that could, given the expense of these rehospitalization penalties, if we can reduce that could pay for a lot of the life enrichment programming we're talking about in a skilled rehab hospital setting. Now, the other thing too is depression rates. As I began with, depression impairs every single type of memory ability we can measure. If we can reduce depression by enhancing executive functioning, by improving social engagement, by getting people to physically exercise, that's going to improve the overall community. Some of the studies find physical exercise is equally or more effective than an antidepressant. And this is a particularly important topic for a geriatric population, given the side effects for antidepressants, such as the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, are much worse for older adults. The GI side effects, for example, are much worse for older adults. So if we can improve depression by having good quality life enrichment programs, getting people to exercise and engage more, that's obviously going to improve the residents' quality of life. I just think it's clear. We need to take social programming and the goal of creating opportunities for meaningful interactions and pursuits very seriously. In addition, the physical exercise and social engagement programs can decrease depression, improve engagement in the community. All of that creates a more vibrant community. When people come to visit, they're like, this is a place that I could live. I would want to live here, or I'd want my parents to live here. And decrease the moves onto higher and more intensive care. One of the best things for communities that have these sorts of programming are the effects on marketing. So these types of programs obviously have a direct impact on our marketing efforts. And I would ask, could marketing budgets be diverted to support or enhance activities in fitness programming? I've seen many communities do this successfully, and that can indirectly help the marketing, give them things to talk about. They're going to be able to show not just a beautiful physical plan, but also the important things happening day to day in the community. So where do we go from here? Well, we really need to operationalize life enrichment. You can't efficiently maximize life enrichment in all of your communities without a platform or a program that is scalable. I've worked with a lot of communities to do this, and this is actually one of the biggest challenges that we see, where we don't want every life enrichment director in all the different buildings reinventing the wheel, spending countless hours trying to track participation, trying to figure out what are we doing for cognitive stimulation, how are we going to redirect the individuals that are having unwanted behaviors. I mean, this is very labor intensive to come up with the materials and the interventions. We need to have a way to operationalize it and scale it up through the entire community. And that's where Charles is going to come in and talk about how to do that. There are tested programs available, and Link Senior can help operationalize many aspects of the brain health programming that we've been talking about, with the overall goal of improving resident quality of life. So that's my part of the presentation, and now I get to hand it over to Charles.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is, again, Charles Villeneuve. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Link Senior. And Dr. Rob, thanks again for your material and insights. I do want to mention the fact that although we're representing Link Senior, our goal here is to educate the market and you, the audience, not really on Link Senior, but more on what is the structural problem, like the problem of the market when it comes to engaging the older adult. And we also wanted to share with you best practices that we've seen operators, whether it's in independent living, assisted living, memory care, or the nursing home environment, how have they been able to implement some of the things that Dr. Rob has mentioned. Some of it comes with using technology. There are a lot of different types of technology out there, and we recommend that you consider them. But sometimes it's also just common sense. So again, my part of the presentation in the remaining 10-15 minutes is going to be to focus on the huge opportunity in engaging the older adult and also sharing best practices with you. So first things first, let's start at what we consider to be the deepest problem and one of the biggest opportunity today in senior care. And I'll start by kind of a random question, and it's actually not random, but like a question that sometimes takes people off guard, which is, do you know how many minutes on average does our resident get in terms of engagement every day? In other words, meaningful, purposeful engagement a day. And the sad average is actually 11 minutes per day. And that's a CDC report that was published in 2015. So remember, the bulk of that population cannot self-recreate. Dr. Bill Thomas, the founder of the Eden Alternative, came up one day with this quote that is really important to us, which is the idea that the bulk of the suffering in senior care is linked to boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And this is explained with this report. And often we sadly joke about the fact that within these 11 minutes, we get the 3 Bs, which is bingo and Bible and birthdays, which sometimes, and we still see this, makes up for the bulk of engagement in some of the communities or building that we see. And not that there's anything wrong with the Bible and the birthday and bingo, but we all want more than that, and especially if we don't like bingo, for example. But I would sit back and also consider this, which is the third part of the problem, which is if I am an activity director, or if I am an executive director, or when I have a population I serve, how do I know who needs the most the engagement? Often I actually don't. And the problem with that is if somebody is very isolated and suffers from depression, if somebody is living with dementia and we know that they're 4 times more likely to fall, I need to know also when these people are less engaged so we can re-engage them and drive person-centered care, because we know, as Dr. Rob has explained, has many benefits. So again, the market problem that we see is not enough engagement, that isn't person-centered enough and therapeutical enough. And also, we don't focus sometimes on the people that need it the most. Now, why does this problem exist? We all know that the population itself, the residents we serve, we work with, are highly dependent. There's a high level of depression, a high level of dementia. Most of our staff today uses only paper when it comes to the workflow of engaging residents. There's another scary statistic for the nursing homes, is that 60% of the residents living in a nursing home do not get a single visit from a family member. So these all explain why, there is such a big opportunity in terms of increasing the quality of life, and some also explains a lot the sad statistics we have around the use of antipsychotics. Now, this is the new update came up for the nursing homes today, and it's actually at 15.4, so we need to change that slide, just FYI. But still, there is the idea that we shouldn't be considering any drugs when it comes to our older adult, especially if we can drive this person-centered engagement. So how do we do that, actually? That's a great question. How do we do that? Well, a lot of it has to do with what Dr. Rob was explaining, which is understanding what research is, what can be done and not be done sometimes, but what can be done and how can we operationalize that. And so, there's this interesting concept, which is if I am a resident and I move into one of your community, there should be a way to automatically assess that resident, right? This is what we do every single time somebody comes in. For example, myself being French, say I like soccer and Dr. Rob likes American football, our experience should be different every single time. And when it comes to the assessment, that data should then flow into the creation of some kind of engagement plan. Dr. Rob's experience should be different than mine based on who he is and also where he is physically or cognitively. Once the plan is put in place, we should be implementing that plan. And as important as the 3 first steps, we need to have some kind of evaluation process. We need to understand, are we doing the right thing and does it work? And if it doesn't, what can we do to improve that? The issue and one of the biggest opportunity we see in the market today in senior care is that there's a lot of point solution. Most of this is driven by paper, but nothing orchestrates everything when it comes to supporting the needs and purpose of the resident. So obviously for most of you, this is Reg Therapy 101. I went through the training of an activity director, so an activity director is fully trained on this, and this is the basics. But as much as it is the basics, we would like to challenge you on the idea of how good are you? And there's easy questions around that, which is 1, do you know for sure that you've engaged all of your residents, right? There's another question, which is, do you know if you've engaged all of your residents based on who they are, what their preferences are, and where they are physically or cognitively? And that becomes very, very challenging. Now, the reason why we want to push you on this is, remember, we talked about drugs, and Dr. Rob discussed that a little bit. I discussed a little bit the statistics, but beyond antipsychotics, we all know that we're probably using too much antidepressants, pain medication, and so on and so on. And I think that although kind of a big goal, I think that we in the engagement, the activity, the rest therapy field in senior care, we should really, really focus on how can we make engagement part of the treatment or the experience, right? There is no reason why we are over-medicating our older adults. And we have clients and there are operators out there that have done a significant job, sometimes reducing to 0% the use of antipsychotics. So, considering the background of Dr. Rob, how this can be implemented and looking at the workflow and best practices, again, we are a technology company. There are other people in our category, but we would like to explain to you how some of the best practices out there function and help you operate this and make sure that we are engaging all of our residents all the time. So to do this, what you want is your staff to have access to content and interventions and evidence-based tools so that we, any person in our staff, we can do, when needed, music for music therapy, or reminiscing therapy, or cognitive games based on who the person is and where they are physically and cognitively. As much as these are important, and this could be even hand massage or like the evidence-based intervention, as much as that engagement intervention is important, we also need to have tools to implement that in our workflow. Remember the 4 steps I discussed. We need to be able to grab information on who the residents are. This is typically an interview process, a life story. We need to craft a plan based on that. We probably sometimes want to share it with the family or third parties, but then we also want to document things, how they happen, whether they happened or not, and how well or how not well sometimes it happens. Ultimately, again, 2 phases of the technology that we strongly urge you to look into if you want to, again, operationalize some of that research and some of these best practices. I think something that's important also is when we consider best practices, Dr. Rob mentioned several times this idea of the dimensions of wellness. We have clients today, and there are operators out there, you know, especially in the urban setting, where they serve the needs of residents that fall under 14 different denominations, religious denominations. It's very hard to expect from our staff to know by heart, for example, 14 different types of religion. So you want to make sure that your staff has the right tool at the right time for the right resident. Now, talking about the different types of usage, there's a quote that I like from somebody that I know that works in the field of dementia. She once told me that, you know, always remember that the next place where your residents will move is probably worse. And I love that because it sets a lot into perspective what Dr. Rob was saying, which is we need to create environments where the older adult is engaged no matter where they are physically or cognitively, no matter the level of reserve they have. And again, this is where technology can help a lot. It can help with self-directed activity. It can help in a group, very large groups, mid-sized group with smaller groups. And sometimes at the very last stages, it can help for the bedside visits, the room visit, the one-on-one, and sometimes, as discussed previously, to help people through different types of behaviors, such as wandering or sometimes being aggressive. Now, at Link Senior, obviously, we're big into technology, but we're also big into education. And we put out almost two years and a half ago, dementia cue cards, which is we reviewed all the research out there when it came to non-pharmacological intervention and boil it down in cue cards to help you understand, for example, if we have somebody who's sundowning, what will be the best life enrichment or non-pharmacological intervention? So we actually created these educational material. We just reviewed them and they're re-edited, so we'll be happy to share that with you. And we're about to start the same type of effort with other things such as depression and pain and so on. The point I'm trying to make, and this is just a little test for you if you want to kind of think about the answers and how to link sundowning to which of the 3 life enrichment, non-pharmacological intervention. But the point is that with technology, we can operationalize that. So I know that some of you have thought about these questions on the screen. This is the answer. Our challenge to you is, how do you make sure that every single of your staff person knows this? And when a behavior occurs, knows how to address it. There are behaviors out there that are very important that we manage correctly and timely. We know that sometimes residents are aggressive with the staff, with other residents, and so on and so on. And there are better ways than the use of antipsychotic medication. Ultimately, if you were to boil down and embrace the best practices and some of the technologies out there, what would the result look like? What can we expect? Consider yourself with a roadmap of 6, 12, maybe 18 months. What would you like to do? I think that a good place to be in is the idea that we know what we're doing in terms of engagement, right? So for example, we know that we are engaging all of our residents. We know how we are engaging them. Is my staff, for example, spending more time in groups versus one-on-one? How many non-pharmacological interventions are we doing? And by the way, because we know at what time they occur and for which resident, how much of these can we actually prevent by scheduling the right engagement for the right resident with the right staff at the right time? Again, consider technology only as an enabler of best practices, but ultimately, what is the goal, right? And the goal, we challenge you on thinking that it is about driving person-centered care and meaningful engagement in a measurable way. And I think that ultimately, this is where I get very personally passionate in this field and this work. But I know that most frontline staff person live for this spark that they can create with the residents of knowing that they're engaging them no matter where they are physically or cognitively. But the challenge here is, how do you make sure that it happens every single time? And this is the promise, and where we see resident engagement as such a promising field, is the concept that we can help meet the needs of every single resident, no matter where they are, physically or cognitively, and no matter who they are, right? What their lives have been, and what are they still trying to accomplish in their life. So this is our last slide. Before we move into the Q&A, I did want to highlight a project that Link Senior started with a lot of its partners late last year in the fall, and you might have heard it. And it's a big campaign around anti-ageism, which we've dubbed Old People Are Cool. And so there is a website, oldpeopleare.cool. And on there, you'll see there's a lot of different resources to fight ageism and to promote better care for older adults. And there is also a store where you can buy things, and all the profits go to the Alzheimer's Association. So with that, happy to move into the Q&A section. Again, I want to thank Dr. Rob for joining us in such an educational piece of our webinar today. And more importantly, or at least as importantly, wanted to thank you for not only joining the webinar, but also working day in, day out with our older adults in order to maximize their quality of life. With that, I'll open it to questions, and yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Dr. Rob. So again, this is Sean. I want to thank everybody for joining. We do have a couple questions that came in. What I'm going to do right now is I am going to paste the survey link, which again, I would ask that everybody take. That is in the chat box that went out just now. So whether you are the only person on or you have multiple people, please make sure you fill out this survey, as this is how we will get back to you with regards to your CEU accreditations. But now for a couple questions that we had. So just had a question come in, which was, do you recommend that other staff, such as a CNA, document meaningful engagements? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
I can take that. This is Charles with Link Senior. We go by the fact that any types of measurement is always good, is always better than no measurement. So obviously, the challenge sometimes with the staff is you want to educate them a little bit on what does it mean. Like, are we just taking check-ins at activities, or are we trying to record how engaged the residents are? But generally speaking, we want to document as much as possible. So that's just a general thought. Dr. Rob, do you have any comments on this?
Well, I think the CNAs are in a very good position to document that, and you know, they're going to know the residents possibly better than anybody else. So I think, yeah, they definitely have a role there.
Thank you. So this next question is, you know, some people say that brain fitness is only beneficial for those who are cognitively intact. Is that true, or is it something that can be beneficial for all residents?
Yeah, so I can take that question. So there are differences in how much the cognitive stimulation can help. You know, if we're looking at middle-aged adults, for example, that don't have any cognitive impairment, you know, my gut feeling is it's probably going to help them. But to be honest, that's very difficult for us to demonstrate empirically, scientifically, because we don't have that much room to improve. We're going to have what we call a ceiling effect on many of the tests. A middle-aged adult who's doing well is going to score, you know, pretty close to the top on those tests. However, as impairment starts to develop, and the sweet spot appears to be mild cognitive impairment. So they're beginning to have some trouble with forgetfulness. It's beginning to affect quality of life. It might have affected the ability to drive. That's the sweet spot. There hasn't been global brain damage usually at that point. So they're able to pay attention, do the activities, and that can lead to an improvement in their ability to make new memories. When we get to early stage dementia, we actually have to hit it a little bit harder. We can still get improvements in most cases at early stage dementia, but we might need to increase intervention by 50% or so. After that, it does become difficult. So much brain damage has occurred that it's difficult to wire up the part of the brain for executive functioning. And we also start, and I know many people listening will have seen this, we hit that mid-stage dementia, we stop having the awareness that we're having a problem. You know, so there's this ironic thing that occurs. You ask somebody at mid-stage dementia, how is their memory? They often will say, no problem, I'm not having any problems, doing quite well. But somebody at the mild cognitive impairment, or not even quite there, if you ask them that question, they might become very aware of their difficulty grabbing names that they know. So there really is a continuum, but the sweet spot is somewhere between mild cognitive impairment and early stage dementia.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Another question that we had, if you could measure only one thing around engagement, what would that be?
Defer to Charles.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think I'll come back to, you know, what we see as kind of the core challenge, but also opportunity in engagement. You know, remember 11 minutes, the 3 Bs, and also making sure that people that need it the most get activity. If I had to measure one thing, I would just consider, am I engaging all of my residents? That's the first questions to ask. And believe it or not, there are places out there where they actually don't know. They can't tell you for sure, yeah, we've done it, or no, there are 5 people left this week, and that kind of thing. So I think that although it's a big endeavor, I would always start with the beginning, right? And try to see, are you actually engaging all of your residents? So I would start by that.
Awesome. Well, those are all the questions. I'll stay on for another minute or so if anybody else has any. But again, just wrapping up the housekeeping details. The certificates of participation will go out on Monday. So keep an eye out for that. Secondly, as I mentioned multiple times, please fill out the survey. There will also be a recording of the webinar in case you'd like to share it with anybody else, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint, which again will all be available early next week. And then continuing on our education path here at Link Senior, we do have another webinar coming up next month. The invite to that will be attached to the email you get your certificates on. And next month's presentation is going to be on the understanding really the NDS Beyond Section F and how to drive case mix leading to higher reimbursement. So again, there will be more information about that. But I want to thank everybody again for joining us this afternoon or this morning based on where you are. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we look forward to connecting with you all soon. Thanks again, Dr. Rob and Charles.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.